मजा आएगा जब सब खेलेंगे ड्रीम 11।
कमी सर्कल पर खेलो, रहो एक कदम आगे और जीतो कैश प्राइजेस।
अब Gamezy.com पे ऐप डाउनलोड करो, अपनी फैंटेसी टीम बनाओ, पॉइंट्स कमाओ और जीतो।
ये एमपीएल है, नो फ्रॉड, नो चीटिंग। यहाँ आपका गेम और पैसा दोनों से।
Last week in our Business of Sports podcast, we tried to get a sense if Rajiv Chandrasekhar, a former telecom tycoon from the early 2000s turned BJP Neta, is being able to successfully play referee in the high-stakes match involving a sector that is perceived to be a problem child to many and therefore has often been at loggerheads with the taxmen, regulators, politicians, and even the babus. We are talking of the world of online gaming. Being a corporate veteran himself, Chandrasekhar, now a central government minister, is well aware of the testy relationships between policymakers and private enterprises. So, in that podcast, we got multiple stakeholders, from a founder CEO of a gaming unicorn to a technology and gaming legal whiz, even a retired judge from Madras High Court, to get a 360-degree stakeholders view, as we noticed, despite the central and state government's intervention or even crackdowns, illegal betting sites domiciled offshore like Fairplay or Perimatch were thriving with impunity, taking out multi-billion dollars without paying any tax in India. And what we heard from our guests simply blew our minds.
We do not want the Indian internet to have something as harmful as betting, whether they are foreign platforms or Indian platforms.
When the cheats are going to innovate new methods of cheating the public, the legislature also has to come out with an innovative method of stopping it.
There are 6 or 7 reasons why they're illegal. One is
Fraud is different from a risky game.
We have built tools that try to identify players who are moving on that path of overconsumption even before they get there.
they try to take payments through dummy accounts, not in their own company name, and then channelize this money abroad. So this is completely illegal.
I do not think that the central government are acting bona fide in this matter.
Maybe rules are of national significance. The rules are coming from the central government. I would say we're taking 2 steps forward and maybe 1 step back.
It's Tuesday, 18th of April. From the Economic Times, I'm your host, Arijit Barman. In today's episode, one can say we are starting off from where we left off in the last Business of Sports episode. We will explore if the new rules indeed are tenable or will they make life more litigious. From technology lawyer Jay Saita, also an expert on gaming legislations in India. And also from London, we will have a very special guest, Sarah Ramanauskas, who works closely with gaming commissions and global betting companies around the world to make them more responsible and safe. To talk about how and why are various governments decriminalizing betting and gambling by making it more mainstream through strict regulations and policing. We too are asking, why go bonkers and ban betting? Legalize instead, with necessary checks and balances, advertising and marketing guidelines, age, time, and wager caps. For a civilization where our epics valorize rise and fall of mighty empires over a roll of dice, are we to still allow Victorian moral codes dominate our changing socio-economic narratives? You're listening to The Morning Brief.
Real money games don't mean that they are not permissible. Real money games which involve wagering on the outcome of that game, regardless of whether that game is a game of skill or game of chance. When it involves money, there is no problem if it only involves money. But the moment it involves money and is a real money game, but involves wagering on the outcome of the game, then that is a no-go area for the Indian internet.
Okay. If we are going too fast, we shall slow down, pause, and take a few steps back to help you reboot and come up to speed. 2 weeks back, on the 7th of April, MeitY, that is the Government of India's Ministry of Electronics and IT, tried light touch methods by notifying new rules for the fast-growing Indian gaming gig. Baby steps that companies said were path-breaking.
Our whole objective is not to be policing the online gaming, but certainly to regulate one small sliver of it. And we want the online gaming ecosystem to grow rapidly to being a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem over the next coming years. But very clearly, it is also clear from the industry and indeed all stakeholders that they don't want government too deeply involved in this innovation ecosystem, and that has been the direction from our honorable PM as well. So we have created these institutions called the SROs, which will be built around the stakeholders of the gaming industry, including but not limited to industry, and they will be based on the principles that the government has laid down on permissibility of non-wagering, user harm and addictive behavior of games. Using those basic principles, they will create the capability and capacity to be able to scrutinize online gaming and certify them.
Entrepreneurs like Trivikraman Thampi, aka Vikram, CEO founder Games 24/7, a PhD in economics from NYU, who also has a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, but started an online gaming company, joined us from Miami, Florida, where he's based out of, and argued this indeed is a milestone moment.
Core regulatory clarity in terms of the government stepping up and saying, hey, we recognize this industry as a legitimate industry and as a contributor to the overall economy. That's something that we've all been clamoring for, to be honest. And so it's a huge positive step in our view, and gives us that much needed clarity, which is, going to boost investor confidence. It's definitely going to create more startups in the space, more innovation, more growth.
But Jay Saita says such euphoria is quite misplaced, as the new rules muddle things more than they actually mend it.
I think the praises are misconceived also to an extent.
Interesting.
Because there are few problems in the way the rules were drafted, right? Firstly, they are drafted under the Information Technology Act and under provisions that only allow regulation of intermediaries through rules.
Right.
Now, what are intermediaries? They are someone who do not decide the content, who do not transmit the content, who have no control over the content. Classic example would be, hosting providers like AWS or social media platforms like Twitter. In case of online gaming, the platforms themselves put out the games, they decide the gameplay, they decide the rules. So they are not intermediaries in the first place.
Right.
So that is my first issue with the rules. And it is well known, accepted in law, that rules cannot exceed the power given to it by Parliament.
Correct.
So rules are framed by the executive, and the act is framed by the Parliament.
Correct.
The Parliament has not given the central government powers to regulate online gaming platforms.
Right.
Still they are doing it. So on that ground itself, the rules can be, and I'm assuming will be challenged soon, and they are legally susceptible in that sense.
Correct. The other issue is it seems that the government is outsourcing their power to frame policy to these so-called self-regulatory organizations or SROs to come up with industry framework,
Yes.
vet what is allowed, what is not allowed. Clearly, that's not kosher, right?
Yes, there are concerns about that also. A subject as sensitive as online gaming, where, winning and losing money, people are facing a lot of genuine issues, socio-economic issues. People are facing financial losses. There is psychological impact. There is addiction.
Correct.
If such a serious issue is left to the vagaries of a private organization, it raises serious concerns.
True.
Although on the other side, the government is saying it will have some amount of oversight. It will have some nominees on the board of such SROs or SRBs.
Correct.
It can deregister them and it will try to monitor them, is what they are saying. But my view is for every sector, there is a statutory regulator which is created under the parliamentary law by parliament. Example, SEBI, for example, IRDA.
Correct.
For example, electricity, there is a regulator.
CRC.
CRC. In every particular sector, there is a body which is run by government officials or people nominated by the government and overseen by the government. So that is what is the need of the hour, not some private bodies.
Now, you have seen states opposing. Tamil Nadu already has a new law. Several southern states have approached various legal forums, High Court, Supreme Court, over legalities. Several have banned all real money games. Even game formats have been questioned. Another big grouse that the states have is the center is encroaching on gambling and betting rules, which they claim is a state subject. Do you think they have a valid cause there?
I think it is a valid cause because even the High Court judgments that are there so far, they have never said that states cannot formulate their own laws on gambling and betting, or be it even games of skill. What they have said is you cannot have a complete ban on games of skill like rummy, poker, daily fantasy sports, etc. It is the constitutional right to do such business, and a full, complete blanket ban may be arbitrary and unjustified and unconstitutional. So what they have said is there should be a rational and logical law, but nowhere have they said that states should just turn a blind eye and leave it to. They have said states can frame another law if they want.
Understood.
Even the high courts which have come down and struck down previous laws, like Madras High Court. And number two, these appeals are pending in Supreme Court also.
Yes.
So Supreme Court has to be the final arbiter and decide center or states who has the power.
Correct.
So until they give the power to center, currently states are not divested of those power. And if the center wants to actually step in, there is a proper constitutional mechanism for doing that, which is when two or more states pass resolutions authorizing the parliament to frame laws, they can divest their powers to parliament and ask parliament to take over from them.
Oh, you can actually do that.
There is a provision called Article 252 in the Constitution, which allows that.
Okay, so even if the matter is on the state list or concurrent list, states can divest its power and ask the center
To step in.
or the parliament, central parliament, to actually form a national law which is applicable to the entire country. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Which is applicable to whichever states authorize this particular law.
Interesting.
So, and in fact, on a similar subject, way back in 1955, a law was passed like this only by parliament when 7 or 8 states got together and asked the parliament to frame a common law called the Prize Competition Act of 1955 that regulates crossword puzzles and, those puzzles that used to come in the newspapers and the prizes for that. So that was done in the same manner.
Very interesting.
So the center and the states could very well come together on the table and decide on a common law and take up this route.
Very interesting. Rajiv Chandrasekhar is clear that online gaming is not state's purview, it is my purview. Is he correct?
I mean, that is a late realization on his part, because until 1 year back or 2 years back, they have consistently maintained it's a state subject and states can do whatever they like. So without amending the constitution, if he's saying that, I think it is misconceived or a late realization, or he should say why the facts have changed or the law has changed and why he's saying
Correct.
so.
Now, he has also clarified, he's clarified on wagering, saying it is defined clearly as an expression in the Indian contract law. Now, has the minister truly cleared the air, or confusion still prevails?
I think confusion still prevails because the rules, if you see, do not make a distinction between games of skill and games of chance, which is critical.
Right.
All the court judgments so far say games of skill are allowed even when you wager or play with money, while games of chance are not. So that distinction is crucial. And the definition of wagering is not that simple. It could apply to games of skill also. So I think this in itself would lead to more confusion. It could lead to litigation and disputes. So clear and concisely worded rules would have been better in that sense. And the minister's statement has also mentioned that be it games of skill or games of chance, wagering is not permitted. So this has completely confused the issue and will only lead to more disputes.
Right. Last thing I wanted to ask, how would you describe the events that have taken place in the last 1 week? One step forward, one step back, or a radical movement and a new dawn is in the horizon?
I would say one step forward and one step back. The developments have compounded the confusion that the online gaming industry was already facing.
On top of that, the taxation issue, the GST rate, 18 or 28%, that still remains unresolved. And that can actually make or break the industry once and for all.
That is also correct. That has also not been resolved. There was a group of ministers which was studying this issue and had come up with two reports actually because there was no consensus. And that is also something that is pending, and hopefully what the news report suggests that by June, the GST Council is slated to take a decision on this matter. So I think the clarity will come with the times to come. As of now, the confusion still prevails. But in the next year or couple of years, we will definitely see more clarity, either from the courts or from Parliament.
Several states like Tamil Nadu also find it totally unacceptable, and the DMK government swooped in to pass a new law just one business day after the centre notified the fresh rules for online gaming. Word is, several other states from south, east, or even Congress states from the north might crack down. Some have already moved to Supreme Court even before these new rules were passed. But even as the apex and several high courts have already provided some legal cover to the games of skill, like fantasy leagues, rummy, poker, both online and offline, to negate the earlier criminal liability that shrouded the entire sector, a perception issue still shrouds this young industry. Online games are nothing but a rich man's gambit, whipping up greed and promoting addiction and thereafter doom. My fellow TMB host Diya Rekhi spoke to the retired Madras High Court Judge Justice K. Chandru, whose recommendation as a head of a panel made the state government in Chennai pass legislation to find out why a ban was the best way to bust the bots and the alleged unscrupulous companies.
I'm only saying, in the digital world, if there are new methods of cheating, in fact, I remember when the chit fund companies were sought to be regulated by the Tamil Nadu legislature, as a sitting in a bench, I upheld the law. Matter went to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said, when the cheats are going to innovate new methods of cheating the public, the legislature also has to come out with an innovative method of stopping it. There must be a certain amount of self-restraint in matters of addiction and everything. But doesn't mean you will just throw your hands in despair and say, I can't do anything.
When it comes to, indigenous sports, like some that are part of our culture, whether it is Jallikattu in TN or boat races in Kerala and so on, there is always some amount of betting involved. So why is it that this form of, online games is more nefarious than others?
I am only saying in traditional games like Jallikattu or Dahi Handi or boat race, it's a amount of incentives could have been there for the person winning team. That means every sport also has got a prize, and sometimes the prize money goes up and the keenness also increases to compete and win the game. That is not the issue today. Today issue is slightly different. I'm only saying this is something which is never anticipated. Now I'm only saying, suppose Jallikattu, why should they abolish Jallikattu? It has been there quite some time. Certain amount of safeguards can be provided, which I think the legislation and the government is having certain amount of control. It is inappropriate to compare that with an air-conditioned room or having some digital equipment to play some game against a machine and trying to attempt to gain some amount. This is like a fraud. A fraud is different from a risky game. I don't think it's open to the online companies to say that they are doing some very pious job. Their only job is to lure people to lose more money so that their coffers are fattened. Now, this inducement coming from a multinational or a organized group in a given situation, the state responds to a situation and it is bona fide. But the response of the companies or the response of the central government or the response of the governor is not the same bona fide we can assert. It could be a different agenda which they have not revealed. It is easy to guess such kind of agenda because the amount of money that has been pumped in, the central government has announced GST of 28%, trying to lure the state government the amount of money they may get by running the game. These are all very cheap tactics which the government is playing. Instead of encouraging a state government to fully support them to stop the loss of lives, this kind of a one-upmanship is very wrong. I do not think that the central government acting bona fide in this matter.
Politics aside, if one goes strictly by the law, the degree of the state's censure powers are yet to be tested in the highest court, which is considering appeals against judgments delivered last year by the Madras and Karnataka High Courts. In the middle of all this are gaming companies whose cumulative revenues might touch close to $9 billion in the next 4 years, as per Lumikai, a specialized venture capital fund, are trying to brace it out, constantly trying to improve their tech interventions for age gating, time and money limits, customer KYC to curb players lose control or users face any harm.
I think overconsumption, overindulgence is a problem with anything. There are multiple reports being published which have said that you cannot go from correlation or coincidence to causation. At Games 24/7, we have tried to go one step above and beyond. We've invested tremendously on the data science and AI side. I mean, our data science AI team has grown 8x over the last 5 years. And there's a part of the data science team that is allocated just for this. Like, we want to build tools. We have been building tools. We have built tools that try to identify players who are moving on that path of overconsumption even before they get there. And once we identify these players, once these players are flagged by such a system, they actually have to mandatorily go through a survey that's designed by a professional psychologist. And based on the survey responses, and based on whatever our AI models are telling us, these players are then potentially recommended to counselors who we pay for.
But even Vikram admits that is the easy part. The challenge is following it through. Gaming companies might connect a person who is showing addictive tendency with a therapist, but how do you ensure there is continuity of help?
I think this is one of the general challenges with therapy, that obviously the therapy recipient has to be open to it.
Yeah.
It's not just a challenge in this context with respect to gaming, but in general, there's a lot of people in life who are, stressed about many things, their financial circumstances, their family circumstances, their children. It's just very hard. And I've had some personal experience with this to persuade people to go into therapy. I mean, part of the reason being there's just so much stigma involved in going to therapy and you think there's something wrong with you.
So I ask Sarah, how is the world dealing with the whole situation? How should regulation catch up to make sure it's a win-win for gamers, government, and the gaming companies? Sarah, who loves to travel and is planning a trip to Japan, is a partner at Gambling Integrity that assesses and certifies safer gambling programs in Europe, Americas, and many other parts of the world. She is an industry veteran for close to 20 years. Several politicians, bureaucrats in India feel that there is a direct correlation between addiction, suicide, gambling, and online games. Therefore, their answer is to simply ban them. Is it not simplistic and naive to draw such a correlation?
Well, Arijit, I'm not about to deny that there are no links between gambling and those types of harms. The issue that we have is that the internet is all over. The genie is out of the bottle. You can't put that back. So to try and simply ban gambling is an impossible task. What we've seen over the last 20 years is that more and more states, countries, regions have recognized that legislating online gambling and online gaming is really the only way to truly protect players.
And that is because if you ban them, then the whole economy or the gaming economy goes underground. And that not only leads to a loss of revenue, but also expose gamers to far graver consequences.
Absolutely. Because what we now have around the world, a number of very large organizations who are dedicated to providing gambling as an entertainment. And what we know is that outside of the regulated markets, there are a wide number of bad actors who are kind of hanging out offshore, looking for gamblers who don't understand what a regulated operator can provide to them in terms of safety, and who are just looking out to get as many customers as they can and get as much money out of them as they can without any concern for their safety. So yes, absolutely. What we can see is that over time, the growth of online gambling and online gaming worldwide means that we've got large numbers of very safe and very user-friendly ways of gambling for those people who wish to.
But making the whole thing mainstream should also be under a licensed and stringent regime.
Absolutely, Ajit. What we have, for example, in the UK, which has been an exemplar to other regimes around the world, is a licensed regime where any gambling operator who wishes to offer gaming or gambling to UK citizens must apply for a license to the Gambling Commission. And that Gambling Commission, in turn, can come back to the operator to check that the operator is carrying out all of its duties for player protection, anti-money laundering, funds protection, etc., under the terms of the license. And if they are not compliant with their license, then they can be fined or the license can be taken away. And that licensing also ensures that the tax revenue from gambling and gaming is collected regularly and accurately and goes into the government's pot.
Did regulation and policing evolve in the UK over a certain period of time? Also, tell us about your involvement with the UK government and the Gambling Commission.
So it's really been a journey over the last almost 20 years. And what we've seen is that the gambling industry has grown up in that time. It's recognized that player protection and what we call sustainable play is a far more effective way of running a business than just trying to find the people who want to spend the most and getting that money out of them in the shortest possible time. That is just not a sustainable way of doing business. So what I and my colleagues at Gambling Integrity do is to work alongside operators globally to help them really carry on developing this journey and raising the bar.
Now, you said it's been a journey even in UK, which is an exemplar. So Gambling Act, if I'm not mistaken, came into practice in 2005. Many would argue it almost took a decade for the regulators and other stakeholders to really have some teeth and, streamline the processes.
I think the initial 10 years were a time of understanding what is and isn't possible with technology. All of the power of technology and the internet had been developed really by the gambling operators, and there wasn't really that much power in the hands of the gambler themselves. And I think that is really the journey that we've been on in the last 10 years, is understanding how we can use technology to help gamblers gamble safely. And now in 2023, we have some fantastic products that will enable gambling and gaming operators to look at how someone is playing, understand if that is risky, and give them personalized recommendations to help them understand what their play behavior is like and how they can play more safely, as well as looking more generally at fraud, credit card fraud, payment fraud, anti-money laundering. There's a raft of great technology providers out there who work with the gambling and gaming industry to provide that power, if you like, or that support to gamblers when they are looking to gamble for entertainment and for fun, rather than because they've got an addiction or they're suffering from harm of some sort.
So technology, which is artificial intelligence, machine learning, is actually helping create or gauge behavioral patterns. You can actually block playtime. You can actually block devices. You can have payment thresholds. You can do wonders. So that's at one end to protect consumers. And on the other, technology is also helping regulators to keep a tab on the flow of money so that it is all legit and taxes are paid. So it's a win-win for all.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly, most regulated markets have very strict anti-money laundering regulations that are in line with the regulations that are also required for banks, estate agents, and other regulated financial bodies. The gambling industry is now part of that and play an important role in making sure that the online gambling sites are not being used for financial crime.
But for every legit company, like an Entain or a Flutter, which are A, listed, and B, changing their stripes and getting their house in order, exiting gray markets to evolve more and more as entertainment companies, technology companies, there are still many who are dodgy and fly-by-night operators operating in tax havens as diverse as Malta, British Virgin Islands, Curacao, Cayman Islands, etc., etc. Is there a concerted global crackdown that is happening on these fly-by-night operators?
So I wouldn't say there's a global crackdown. Certainly in Europe, just over the last week, there's been an agreement between major European regulators, the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, to look at the illegal sites and try and bring in better ways of protecting their own regulated markets from those fly-by-nights, as you call them. So there is work going on one side, which is regulators working with ISPs, for example, with banks, to try and minimize the ability of these offshore players to attract players and to take money from them. So I think the number of fly-by-nights is definitely going to decrease, but I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think we will always have this issue. And the most effective way, really, of counteracting them is education.
True.
To educate gamblers in a market that safe, licensed sites are where they should go to play because they will be safe and their money will be safe.
And coming back to the UK, you interestingly also have a thriving national lottery system since 1994. It contributes billions to the exchequer, contributes money to charity, and of course is a prized contract to operators to actually run the lottery. How does it work? And has it really helped reduce the stigma attached to betting or gambling?
So, in terms of how it works, the British population, I think the latest number is around 47% of every adult, all the adults in the UK purchase lottery tickets.
Wow.
It's incredibly popular. really, really popular. You go into your local corner shop and you can buy lottery tickets, and it's a little sort of dream, if you like, for the week where you've got your lottery ticket, you spent £2 and you could win £12 million, completely life-changing. So it's a little sort of dream that takes you through the week. And you've also got the knowledge that your money is going to good causes. So has it actually reduced the stigma of gambling? I think to a certain extent. I think what people know is that really the National Lottery it's not really seen as proper gambling, but the fact that it's there and it's highly regulated, it's a contributor again to the government and to the Treasury as well as to good causes, means that there's a general understanding that if you gamble in whatever form, that money goes back to the government in taxes.
Is that a big component of the government's revenues? Taxation from betting, gambling, lottery?
The last time I looked, I think it was in the region of £6 to £7 billion, only slightly less than the amount given in by beer.
Wow, that's staggering. And now several countries in Europe, from Ireland to Spain to Italy, France, Luxembourg, they all have these lottery systems. That is really spreading the good cheer.
Yes, it's something that the majority of governments see as an easy way to, one, raise taxes, as we've said, to generate money for good causes. And it's been something which actually has been a way for governments to raise money for hundreds of years. So wars in the 1700s were financed through lotteries. I believe the first American settlers were financed through lotteries. So it's a very ancient form of persuading people to hand over a very small amount of cash, but in large numbers, to fund government treasury needs.
Right. And you talk about America, and legalizing betting has actually crossed the Atlantic too, because state after state after state in the US are legalizing betting as well. Clearly, legislation is the key.
Absolutely. Again, what was very clear as the internet spread was that Americans love to gamble. I think even before sports betting was completely legal in the States, a survey showed that 1 in 5 Americans bet on sports anyway, even though it wasn't legal. So it was clear to the majority of states that this gambling revenue was going offshore to your fly-by-nights in Curacao and British Virgin Islands and other places. And they wanted a slice of that action. And again, to safeguard players, to have fully licensed environments where proper legislation and grown-up gambling operators came together to provide safe and enjoyable gambling experiences.
So what do you think is holding our policymakers back? Is it social prejudices or our socioeconomic fabric, which is, we are still a developing economy with a lot of poor people? Is it politics? Is it a combination of all that? Or is it simply misplaced Victorian morality even after we've become an independent country?
Well, that's quite a question. I don't feel that I'm necessarily the right person to answer that. But what I guess I see, because I've been following this issue for some years now, because I have been concerned, really very concerned about the fact there is no regulation in India. And I can see problems that are being done by forcing players to go offshore. Why is it still unregulated? Well, it seems that politicians want to play the safe line and not be seen to be encouraging an immoral or sinful activity. But having said that, you can buy alcohol in most states. You can smoke in most states. So I'm a little baffled as to why gambling particularly has this stigma attached to it.
True.
And yes, definitely, there are demographic issues. But for online gambling, it's very easy to ensure that any client that comes onto your gambling site can afford the spend that they're putting through the site.
Sarah actually clarified later that the Office of Budget Responsibility reckons betting and gambling duties in UK alone will amount to over £3 billion in fiscal year 2023 alone. Whereas in India, Economic Times reported very recently that the GST department has calculated that at least 38 offshore online betting companies have evaded tax to the tune of 12,000 crore rupees. Banning will only make matters worse, taking the economy underground. My take. So, make it simple. Just legalize. There are global frameworks one can look at and replicate. For example, the UK model, where a central framework under the Gaming Commissioner, a quasi-judicial superman armed with technology specialist auditors, has the final word. Or the US model, where there is no distinction, but each state issues license and decides in a federal framework. The social dynamics and the addictive impact on adults and especially children must also take center stage in a country like India for in-app purchases, as it can indeed lead to financial woes for families. Thus, parental guidance is a must. It will be equally onerous to scrutinize every microtransactions and prize pools, but as Vikram said, technology already exists and allows daily time and spending caps being hardwired into the apps. See KYC details for wagers above a certain limit to bring in age barriers. Dealing with addiction at the end of the day has to be an individual's responsibility. What can the state do to save yourself from yourself? And should it? That's all for now. We hope you like listening to this episode. Please do follow, like, and share the episode on your social media handles. The Morning Brief drops every Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays and is now streaming on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, apart from the Economic Times website and, of course, ET Play, the Economic Times' very own audio platform. A big thanks to all our guests, Jay, Vikram, Sarah, and of course, Justice K. Chandru. Deeply appreciate it. A big shout out to Rajesh Nayak, our sound engineer, and show producer Vinay Joshi. Executive producers Anupriya Naya, Anirban Chaudhary, and yours truly. Thank you once again for listening. Goodbye and good luck. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits mentioned in the description.